A sharp crack echoed through the throne hall as Isabelle's palm met the Alpha King's cheek, his jeweled crown tilting askew while the court gasped. His earlier words, "I will bed you," still burned in the air. But Isabelle's voice cut sharper than the slap as she trembled with fury, eyes gleaming with unshed tears. Around them, nobles froze, torn between terror and fascination, as King Vylor's head slowly turned back to her, not with rage, but with a dark, unreadable hunger that made her heart lurch. Before she could drop to her knees and beg for mercy, his lips curved into a lethal smile, and he murmured, "If you dare strike a king, little maid, then you must be brave enough to become his queen. Tonight." Chapter 1. The Slap. The throne hall smelled of beeswax and ambition. Isabelle kept her eyes down as she refilled Lord Harren's wine, the way she'd been taught. Invisible hands, invisible face. Around her, nobles glittered like jeweled beetles, their laughter sharp enough to cut. At the far end of the Crimson Runner, King Vylor Draven lounged on his throne, crown tilted slightly askew. Even from 30 paces, she could see the shadows under his eyes. 3 weeks since he'd slept properly, the kitchen maids whispered. A month since he'd smiled at anything but blood sport. "You there, Maid?" The king's voice cut through the murmur like a blade through silk. Isabelle's hand froze on the decanter. "Not me. Please, not me." "Yes, the one with the wine. Come here." Every eye in the hall swiveled toward her, the weight of their attention pressed down like a hand on her neck. She set the decanter on Lord Harren's table with careful precision and walked the length of the runner, each step echoing against vaulted stone. Vylor watched her approach, head tilted like a hawk, considering prey. Up close, the exhaustion was more pronounced. Bloodshot eyes, a muscle twitching in his jaw, fingers drumming restlessly on the throne's arm. She curtsied, kept her gaze on the marble between his boots. "Look at me." She lifted her chin. His eyes were dark grey, the colour of winter storms. They catalogued her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What's your name?" "Isabelle Thalea, Your Majesty." "Isabelle." He rolled the syllables around like wine in his mouth. "I've seen you before. You stopped Lord Corwin from striking that stable boy last month." Her heart kicked. She'd thought no one had noticed that, just her stepping between a drunk lord and a child who'd spilled feed. "The boy was clumsy, Your Majesty, not malicious. And you thought yourself qualified to make that judgment." His tone was light, dangerous. "I thought myself qualified to prevent a child from losing teeth over scattered oats." Murmurs rippled through the court. Someone gasped. Lord Harren made a strangled sound. Vylor's eyes glittered. Bold, for a maid. Necessary, for a human being. The hall went silent. Somewhere, a woman's fan snapped closed with a sound like breaking bone. The king leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me, Isabelle Thalea, do you know what I do to those who speak to me with such familiarity?" "I imagine you remind them of their place, Your Majesty." "I do." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "I also reward honesty when I find it. So few people in this hall have the spine for it. You, however, seem to have an excess." He stood. The crown caught torchlight, throwing golden shadows across his face. "I find myself intrigued. Perhaps tonight, after this tedious performance is done, I will bed you. See if your courage extends to other activities." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread outward, gasps, whispers. a few nervous laughs from men who didn't know what else to do. Isabelle's vision tunneled. Heat flooded her face, then drained away, leaving ice in its wake. She thought of Laura, barely 16, already learning to make herself small when nobles looked too long. Of Marta, who disappeared into a lord's chambers and come back hollow-eyed. Of every girl in the scullery who scrubbed floors and swallowed humiliation because speaking cost more than they could afford. Her hand moved before her mind could catch up. The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the throne hall like a thunderclap. Vilo's head snapped to the side, his crown tilted, then slipped, clattering against the stone steps with a metallic ring that seemed to last forever. The world stopped. Isabelle stared at her hand, still tingling, still raised, as if it belonged to someone else. On the king's cheek, a perfect red handprint bloomed like a brand. I'm dead. I'm dead. Velo's head turned back slowly. She braced for rage, for the guards to drag her away, for the swift descent of a blade. Instead, his eyes lit with something she couldn't name. Not anger, something brighter, sharper, almost like recognition. His lips curved into a smile that made her blood run cold. If you dare strike a king, little maid, he said softly, then you must be brave enough to become his queen. He raised his voice, letting it carry to every corner of the hall. The maid, Isabelle Thalea, will be prepared for coronation and marriage before the moon reaches its highest point tonight. The court erupted, not with sound, but with the horrible silence of held breath and swallowed shock. Your Majesty, Lord Harren began. Did I stutter? Velo's tone could have frozen wine in its cup. Prepare her. The ceremony will proceed as ordered. 2 guards stepped forward. Isabelle's knees wobbled, but she locked them. If she fell now, they'd say the maid had broken, that the king's mercy was too great for her to bear. She lifted her chin and met Velo's gaze one last time. He was still smiling, still wearing that red handprint, like a medal. As the guards led her toward the hall's great doors, she caught Laura's face in the crowd, white with terror, eyes huge. Isabelle gave her the smallest nod she could manage. I'm sorry I won't be there tomorrow. But at least tonight, every girl in that scullery would know. Someone had said no, even if it cost everything. Chapter 2. Preparation. The royal apartment smelled of lavender and privilege. Isabelle stood in the center of a chamber, larger than the entire servants' quarters, surrounded by women who touched her like she was a doll. They stripped her work-worn dress, scrubbed her skin until it stung, wound her hair into elaborate braids she'd never be able to replicate herself. Lady Mayellen supervised with the cool efficiency of someone who dressed corpses for burial. The king chooses from the scullery now, she murmured, examining a rose-colored gown. Interesting taste. Is this real? Isabelle's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Or is he toying with me before the execution? Melon's eyes, pale blue, sharp as winter, fixed on her face. The king does not joke about marriage. Whether you survive his favor, girl, is another matter entirely. How many haven't survived? A pause. Melon's fingers stilled on the silk. 3 queens before you. 1 died in childbirth. 1 took poison rather than share his bed another night. 1 simply faded, like a flower without sun. I slid down Isabelle's spine. And you're dressing me anyway. I dress whom I'm ordered to dress. Malin lifted the gown. Arms up. The silk slid over her skin, cool and impossibly soft. Foreign. The sleeves hugged her arms, the bodice fit as if measured for her specifically. "This belonged to Princess Astrid," Maelin said, fastening tiny pearl buttons up the back. "From the Eastern Isles. She was meant to marry the king 2 years ago. What happened? She chose a different king and paid dearly for the insult." Melon's voice was flat. "Consider the dress recycled fortune." Isabelle caught her reflection in the full mirror. A stranger stared back. Dark hair braided with gold thread, rubies at her throat, silk the colour of late roses clinging to curves she'd barely known she had. She looked like she belonged in a throne room. She felt like she was drowning. A trumpet sounded, muffled by stone walls. Malin glanced toward the door. "The king is meeting with his council in the war chamber. He's ordered you to serve him there. Pour his wine, stand where he tells you, until the moon rises high enough for the ceremony." Her lips thinned. Strange request. But then, everything about tonight is strange. "He wants to parade me," Isabelle said quietly. "Show them what happens to maids with sharp tongues." "Perhaps," Melon studied her. "Or perhaps he wants to see if you'll slap him again." Guards materialized at the door, 6 of them, armored and silent. They formed a ring around her as Melon led the way into the corridor. The walk to the war chamber felt like a descent. Downstairs she'd never been allowed to climb, past tapestries she'd only dusted from below, through passages where servants walked quickly and kept their eyes down. At the base of a narrow stairwell, heavy doors loomed. The scent of ink and steel seeped through the cracks. The guards pushed them open. The war chamber was exactly what it sounded like. Maps covering every wall, pins and notes clustered like battle scars. A massive table dominated the center, strewn with parchments and provincial seals. Weapons gleamed on racks along one wall, polished to mirror brightness. Varla stood at the table's far end, cloak discarded, crown lying sideways next to a scatter of documents. In lamplight, the red mark of her hand stood out like fresh paint on his cheek. He looked up when she entered. For a heartbeat, the room contracted to just the 2 of them. Without the crown, he looked different. Less monument, more man, tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and old scars visible at his collar. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with capability. "Your Majesty," Melon bowed. "As commanded." He dismissed her with a flick of his fingers. The doors closed. Only 2 guards remained, stationed near the entrance like statues. Vela's gaze dragged over Isabelle. The gown, the jewels, the way her hands twisted in the silk. "The princess's dress suits you better than it suited her," he said. She simpered. Isabelle found her voice, somewhere beneath the fear. "She also survived you. I'm told that's rarer than it should be." One of the guards coughed, choking on air. Vela's mouth curved. Not quite amusement, not quite a smile. "Come here, Isabelle Thalea." Her feet obeyed before she could argue. She stopped when the table's edge pressed against her skirt. Vela leaned against the wood, arms folded, studying her like she was a newly discovered territory. "Pour." He nodded toward a crystal decanter and 2 goblets near his hand. She lifted the decanter carefully. The wine within caught the light like pooled garnets, dark and rich. She poured without spilling, set it down with a soft click. "Careful," Vela said. "It would be a shame if my new queen stained her pretty gown before anyone's admired it." "It would be a greater shame," Isabelle replied, if your queen allowed herself to be paraded like a prize hound and said nothing. His eyebrow rose. You say that after striking me in front of half the court? Yes. I'd rather die for one honest act than live a lifetime holding my tongue. He studied her with that same unreadable interest, like she was a creature he'd never encountered before. Inconvenient, intriguing, impossible to categorize. Drink. He offered her one goblet. She hesitated, then accepted. Their fingers brushed. There was no tremor in his hand. The mark on his cheek might have belonged to someone else entirely. He raised his own cup. To the maid who found steel under her apron. She didn't echo the toast, just took a small swallow, the wine rich and unfamiliar on her tongue. Viola watched her over the rim. Do you know why none of them moved to your defense? The nobles, the courtiers, even the servants who've shared your bread. Because they're afraid of you. Fear is a language everyone understands. He set his cup down, fingers tapping once against wood. Respect, on the other hand, is rare. You're either very foolish, Isabelle Thalia, or very brave. I didn't slap you to impress you. Then why? Genuine curiosity colored his tone. That stung more than mockery would have. Because you humiliated me, she said. Because you spoke of my body as if I were a thing to be used and discarded. Because the girls in the scullery will hear what you said and think that's all they're worth. Something flickered in his eyes. Shadow, old and deep. I spoke like every man of my station does in that hall. You merely chose to answer where they do not. That doesn't make it right. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. The admission shocked her more than the proposal had. Before she could respond, footsteps thudded in the corridor outside. The doors opened to admit 3 men in fine cloaks. Lord Harun, with his gold-ringed beard, a slim, sharp-eyed counsellor named Tessian, and a third she didn't recognize. They bowed, their gazes flicked to Isabelle, then away, like she was something dangerous they didn't want to acknowledge. Majesty, Harun began, there is concern among the lords about tonight's announcement. Concern. Vailor didn't look up from the map he was studying. That word again. One would think you all marinated in it. The nobles don't understand why a maid should be raised above them, Tessian said carefully. They fear it makes you appear human, Vailor suggested. Capable of impulse? Vulnerable, Tessian corrected. Vailor's quill stilled. When he lifted his head, the temperature in the room dropped. An alpha's choice doesn't make him vulnerable, he said softly. Only those too timid to choose for themselves think so. Harun shifted his weight. Majesty, forgive me, but the story spreading isn't that you chose a queen. It's that a maid lost her temper and struck you. If you marry her now, the tale becomes one of weakness, not strength. It becomes whatever I say it is. The councillors exchanged glances. Vailor's gaze pinned each of them in turn until they dropped their eyes. Isabelle stood against the wall, where he'd positioned her, watching. She saw the way he held their attention through nothing but silence, saw the exhaustion at the corners of his mouth, barely visible, but there. The healer's words from before echoed in her memory. Something about sleepless nights and fraying nerves. He looked like a man running on fumes and pride. You will proceed with the ceremony, Harun pressed, though his voice trembled. There's still time to reconsider. We could say the maid was overwrought, feverish. We could say, Valo cut in, ice dripping from every syllable, that my future queen has more courage than the lot of you combined. She struck me, and instead of begging for mercy, she stands in my war chamber, wearing a dead princess's gown, and glaring at me as if I'm the one who erred. All three councillors' heads swiveled toward her. Isabelle resisted the urge to shrink back. She'd given them enough spectacle for one day. Tessian's lip curled faintly. With respect, Majesty, what choice does she have? She's trapped by your word. So are you, Vela said. My word made you lords. It can just as easily unmake you. Now leave. Dress yourselves in whatever silks you favor, and practice your smiles. You'll be at my wedding. You'll clap at the right moments. You'll drink to my queen's health. His voice dropped, and you'll remember that I don't tolerate those who second-guess me in my own chamber. They fled. The doors shut behind them with a muffled thud. Vela exhaled slowly, pressing fingers to his temples. His eyes closed for just a moment, brief enough to miss if she hadn't been watching. Then he straightened, rolled his shoulders, and turned to face her. More wine, he said. She crossed to the table. As she refilled his goblet, her gaze snagged on something she hadn't noticed before. A small glass vial sitting near the maps, its contents the colour of weak tea. What is that? She asked before she could stop herself. He glanced at it, mouth tightening. Something I won't take. Medicine? A sleeping draught. My healer insists I need it. I insist he minds his own concerns. Vela took the refilled goblet from her hand, fingers brushing hers. Sleep is a luxury kings can't afford. Sleep is a necessity even kings require. Is that your medical opinion, Isabelle the physician? It's common sense, Vilo the exhausted. His eyes widened fractionally. No one called him by name without his title. Then unexpectedly he laughed. The sound was rough, rusty, like something long unused. Bold to the last, he murmured. Come, the moon climbs, we have a wedding to attend. But as she followed him toward the door, her gaze lingered on that small vial. An idea. Dangerous, impossible, took root in her mind. Chapter 3. The ceremony. The chapel smelled of incense and old stone, moonlight streaming through high windows to paint everything silver. Isabelle stood in the antechamber, separated from the main hall by a heavy embroidered curtain. Beyond it, nobles were taking their seats. Priests in moon-coloured robes arranged themselves around the altar. Malin adjusted Isabelle's circlet one final time. You'll walk when the bells ring thrice. Don't stumble. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't faint. She stepped back, assessing. The court is wagering on how far you'll get before you break. How kind of them. Cruelty is kinder than false comfort. Something almost like sympathy flickered in my Ellen's eyes. Stand tall, Isabelle Thalea. If you must drown, do it with your chin above water. She left. The curtain fell shut. Isabelle was alone, with her reflection in a nearby mirror, and the sound of her own heartbeat. On a small table beside her sat a silver cup, already filled with wine for the binding ritual. Without it, the priests would delay. With it, they would bless the union and announce her name to the kingdom. She stared at the cup, thought of the vial in the war chamber, of Vilo's bloodshot eyes and trembling fingers, of his casual dismissal of something his own body desperately needed. He'll never take it willingly. He's too proud, too afraid of vulnerability. But if someone else decided for him, the thought was treason. It was also mercy. which made it the most dangerous thing she'd considered all night. The bells began to toll. Once. Twice. Isabelle made her decision. She slipped through the back door of the antechamber into a narrow side corridor. No guards stood there. They expected her to be too frightened to wander. Fools. She gathered her skirts and moved quickly. Years of carrying messages through the palace had etched its pathways into her bones. She knew which turns led to unused wings and which to heavy frequented halls. The war chamber was 2 flights up and 3 corridors over. She climbed, breath shallow, pulse hammering. At the top, a single guard remained, the same one from before, helmet tucked under his arm. He straightened. "My lady." "The king left a seal in the war chamber," she said smoothly, letting irritation edge her tone. "The priests are testing his patience. Shall I tell him you delayed me? Or would you prefer to keep your post?" The man blanched. "Of course, my lady. Go ahead." She swept past him, pushed open the doors. The chamber was as she'd left it, maps rustling faintly, candles burning low, the table scattered with parchments, and there, the crystal decanter, still half full of dark wine. Beside it, the small glass vial glinted in the lamplight. Isabelle crossed the room in 4 strides. Her hands were steady as she grabbed the vial, pulled the tiny stopper, and poured its contents into the decanter. The sleeping draught blended seamlessly. No clouding, no scent, no trace. She replaced the stopper, slipped the empty vial into her sleeve. She'd dispose of it later, somewhere no one would find it, and returned the decanter to its exact position. Done. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She'd just poisoned the king's wine, drugged an alpha, committed treason that would see her hanged if anyone discovered it. She was also, possibly, saving his life. He can hate me tomorrow. Tonight, he sleeps. The guard barely glanced at her as she swept back out. "Found it?" She tapped her circlet. "Right where he said." The walk back felt longer. Each turn magnified what she'd done. By the time she slipped into the antechamber again, the 3rd bell was tolling. Melon's hand emerged through the curtain. Now. The main chapel opened before her like a painted story. Vaulted arches, flickering candles, rows of nobles in silk and jewels. At the far end, the altar gleamed with silver wolf carvings, a great crescent moon etched above. Between her and that altar stood Varlor, clad in black and gold. His crown sat perfectly straight, his posture effortlessly commanding. The red mark from her hand had faded to a ghost. She walked the long aisle. Whispers swelled and broke like waves. She kept her eyes on him, refusing to look anywhere else. When she reached the steps, she curtsied, not the full, sweeping obeisance the priests probably expected, but more than defiance. A compromise. Velo's hand descended, fingers curling lightly under her chin to lift her face. The touch was warm, calloused, unexpectedly gentle. "Rise," she obeyed. Their hands brushed as she straightened. The high priest stepped forward, spreading his arms. "We gather beneath the moon's gaze to bind Alpha and Queen. Let those who stand witness remember this night." You have no idea, Isabelle thought. The ritual proceeded with inevitable slowness. Questions about loyalty, duty, sacrifice. She answered each, forcing the words past the knot in her throat. "I will guard the crown. I will stand beside the Alpha. I will put the realm before myself." At last, the priest gestured to a silver cup on the altar, the shared draught, symbol of one life, one fate. An acolyte carried it to them on a small tray. Viola took it first, holding her gaze as he drank. Then he passed it to her. She swallowed the ceremonial wine, sweet, cloying, nothing like the dark vintage waiting in the war chamber. The priest raised his hands. By blood and bond, by vow and draft, I declare Vailor Draven and Isabelle Thalea bound as Alpha and Queen. May the moon favour your union. Applause rolled through the chapel, some enthusiastic, some reluctant. Vailor turned to the court and lifted their joined hands. Behold, your queen, he said, the woman who dared strike me when all of you cowered. May that courage be the measure by which you treat her. Instead of kissing her mouth, he bent and brushed his lips over the back of her hand. The gesture looked almost courtly, almost distant. Only she felt the warmth of his breath linger an instant too long. The Alpha and his queen will retire to the ancestral chamber, the priest announced. Servants opened side doors. Musicians struck up a triumphant tune. Vailor leaned close, voice for her alone. Smile. They taste fear. She managed a small curve of her lips. His eyes flickered with approval. They walked side by side down a shorter aisle, away from the altar, through carved doors that led deeper into the palace. When the chapel's bustle had faded to distant murmur, Vailor exhaled softly. Well, he said, that was less tedious than expected. You enjoy spectacle. I enjoy control. He glanced at her, which you've been testing all evening. Her pulse jumped. Does he know? I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty. Vailor, he said. In private, you may call me Vailor. You've already struck me. Titles seem excessive at this point. Despite everything, she almost smiled. The corridor ended at a pair of heavy doors, inlaid with silver wolves and crescent moons. Guards stepped aside, bowing. Vailor pushed them open. The ancestral chamber opened around them like a held breath. Vast, circular, its walls etched with runes that gleamed faintly in lamplight. A massive bed dominated the center, draped in dark furs and pale linen. Above it, the ceiling opened to a round skylight through which the full moon stared down, bright and watchful. Magic thrummed in the air, soft, insistent, like a distant heartbeat. Welcome, Vailor said, shrugging off his cloak and crown, to the only room in this palace where even I'm not entirely in control. Isabelle stepped farther in, gaze skating over the bed, the glowing runes, the low table near the wall where a fresh decanter and 2 goblets waited. Not the one from the war chamber. Her work wouldn't matter until he returned there. The moon judge is here, Vailor continued, or so the stories say. Every Alpha King has sealed his bond in this room. The magic tests whether the union is worthy. And if it's not, then the marriage is cursed, the heirs are weak, and the kingdom falls within a generation. He said it lightly, but she caught the edge beneath. No pressure. She moved toward the untainted decanter, fingers brushing one of the goblets. Are there rituals? Not many that matter. We drink. We speak words old men wrote to make themselves feel important. We lie down and let the magic decide whether to bless or curse us. Comforting. Were you expecting comfort, Isabelle? No, she said, but I'd prefer honesty. He crossed the space between them, each step deliberate. Then here's honesty. I wanted you long before today. Her breath caught. You barely knew I existed. Oh, I knew. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the old scar at his temple. I saw you step between Lord Corwin and that stable boy. I saw you slip bread to the laundry girls when rations were cut I saw you use your sharp tongue on everyone except me, and I wondered how long it would take before you forgot to swallow the words in front of my throne. And you waited, she said slowly. You could have spoken to me, chosen any other way. I'm not practiced in gentleness, he said. Power is a language I know. I spoke it the way I always have, by threatening to bed a maid in front of your court. His jaw tightened. Yes. Then you're more fool than king. Silence hung between them, taut as a drawn bow. Then, unexpectedly, Viola smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes. Perhaps I am. He reached past her for the fresh decanter, poured 2 cups. To foolish kings and bold maids, he said, raising his goblet. She clinked hers against his and drank. The wine was good, better than anything she'd ever tasted. It spread warmth through her chest, loosening some of the tension in her shoulders. Viola set his cup aside after a single swallow. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A girl weeping in gratitude for escaping the scullery, he replied. A frightened lamb. You're more wolf than most, who wear furs in my hall. She thought of the vial's contents, now mixing with wine in the war chamber. Wolves can bleed. Yes, he agreed, but they also bite. He stepped closer. The runes along the walls brightened in response, throwing shifting shadows across his face. Tell me, Isabelle, he murmured, when you raised your hand to slap me, what did you feel? Fear? Fury? Freedom? All of them, she said. And when you told me I'd be queen, I felt trapped. His hand lifted, knuckles brushing a stray curl at her temple. The touch was light, almost hesitant. What will save you, then? The question hung in the air, genuine and strange. Perhaps nothing, she said, but I won't go quietly into your shadow. Not in your hall, not in your chamber, not in your bed. The last words settled between them, heavy and electric. His eyes darkened. You think I want your silence? I think you want my submission. They're not the same, but you've mistaken one for the other too long. His breath left him slowly. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his features. Quick enough she might have imagined it. The moon listens for truth in this room, he said softly. Give it something to hear. She swallowed. Truth was dangerous. It was also the only way forward. I think, she said carefully, that you're the loneliest man I've ever met. And I think you chose me not because I'm brave, but because you're desperate for someone who'll tell you when you're wrong. The runes flared brighter. Viola's hand stilled against her hair. And, he whispered, and I think if you keep ignoring your body's limits, you'll collapse at the worst possible moment, and people will die because of it. People who depend on you. She held his gaze. People like the girls in that scullery you used as props tonight. His throat worked. You're trying to save me, he said hoarsely. The king who humiliated you. I'm trying to save the kingdom that stuck with you, she corrected. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached for her, his hands framing her face, thumbs resting at her jaw. From this night on, he murmured, no one in this kingdom will be more dangerous to me than you. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. He lowered his head. When his mouth met hers, the runes exploded with silver light, bathing the chamber in cold fire. The kiss wasn't gentle, but it wasn't a conquest either. It was a question, a demand, a clash. She tasted wine and iron and something wild. Heat rolled through her, not just from his hands or his body, but from the bond magic curling around them like smoke, testing, judging. Her fingers curled in the fabric at his shoulders. She could have pulled back. Instead, she answered with equal pressure, refusing to be merely taken. The magic surged in response, recognizing the equality of it. When he finally drew away, they were both breathing harder. The glow softened to a steady hum. "This isn't the night I imagined," he said, voice rough, "nor the marriage I wanted. And yet," his hand slid to her waist, "I find myself unwilling to let you go." The bed waited. The moon watched. The magic hummed. But Vilo surprised her again. "We won't consummate anything tonight," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I won't have our first joining tangled with exhaustion and spectacle." His gaze held hers. "When I come to your bed, Isabelle Thalea, it will be with clear eyes and unclouded choices, not because a court demands it." Relief and confusion warred in her chest. "The priests can speculate all they like." He released her, moved toward the bed, but instead of climbing in, he sat on its edge and began unfastening his boots. "Lie with me. Let the magic see we can share darkness without devouring each other." After a moment's hesitation, she climbed up beside him. They lay shoulder to shoulder, staring up through the skylight at the white moon. "Tell me something true," Valo said quietly. "Something no one else knows." She thought for a long moment. "My mother was of a minor house, disgraced before I was born. She sold everything, her name, her jewels, even her hair, to keep us fed. When she died, the palace steward took me in to clear her debts. You have noble blood. Stale noble blood," she corrected. "It bought me a broom, not a dowry." "Blood remembers," he said, "even when men pretend it has no weight." "And you?" she asked. "Something true." He was silent long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then, "I wasn't supposed to be king." She turned her head. In moonlight, his profile looked carved from stone. "You had brothers." "Two." His throat moved. "Arion, the heir. Theris, the shield between us. I was the third son, the spare's spare, the one allowed to race horses recklessly and take border patrols, because my death wouldn't unmake a kingdom." "What happened?" His fingers curled in the fur beneath them. "Arion rode out to meet a delegation under truce. They wore another king's colours, carried his banners. Inside their sleeves, they carried knives." Her breath caught. "Theris died trying to drag Arion from the trap," Vilo continued, voice steady but distant. "By the time scouts reached me, there was nothing to save. Only bodies cooling in grass, and a throne with no one to fill it." "So you took it?" "I took it," he agreed, "and swore no one would ever again see me as the expendable son. Not my court, not my allies, not my enemies, not myself." "You built yourself into a wall," she said slowly, "so no one could see through to the boy who lost his brothers." He went very still. "Perhaps." The moon slipped behind a thin cloud, dimming. In that softer light, he looked younger, if one ignored the scars and the hard set of his jaw. "Now you," he murmured. "Another truth." "I hate storms." "Why?" "When I was small, my mother and I lived in a cottage near the river. The roof leaked. One night the water rose too fast. We woke with it around our ankles. Her cough had been bad for weeks, but she carried me anyway, through dark, through cold, to the hill above the village." Isabelle's voice softened. "After that, every time thunder rolled, she flinched, like it was a fist aimed at my head. She sounds fierce. She was tired. Fierce and tired." She paused. "I buried her on that same hill." They lay in silence, memories settling like dust. At last, Vela shifted onto his side to face her. His hand lifted, settled above her heart, palm warm through silk. "Does it still race from fear?" he asked softly. "Or something else?" She realized her pulse had indeed quickened beneath his touch. Not the frantic pounding of terror, but something more complex. Awareness tangled with curiosity and stubborn resentment. "Both," she admitted. His lips curved. "Good. I'd be disappointed if you weren't afraid of me at all. And if I weren't drawn to you at all, then I'd be insulted, and I suspect the moon would be too." She snorted before she could catch it. The sound startled them both, then loosened something in the air. He chuckled, low and rough, and the magic seemed to purr in response. For a while, they simply breathed, existing in the same space, without demands. Sleep tugged at Isabelle's awareness, the natural exhaustion of a day that had shifted the ground beneath her feet. Her eyes drifted closed. "You can rest," Viola murmured. "I won't touch you more tonight." "You say that, like you're convincing yourself as much as me." "Perhaps I am." But even as her body relaxed, her mind spun forward, to the war chamber, to the drugged wine waiting there, to what would happen when he eventually drank it. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, Vela was gently shaking her shoulder. "Isabelle?" She blinked awake. The moon had shifted position in the skylight, casting different shadows across the room. "I need to return to the war chamber," he said, already standing and reaching for his discarded cloak. "There are documents that can't wait until morning. Treaty amendments that need my seal before the courier leaves at dawn." Her heart kicked into a gallop. "Now?" "The kingdom doesn't sleep just because I married." He fastened the cloak, leaving the crown where it lay. "You should rest here. The bed is more comfortable than anything you've known. I'll come with you." He paused, looking back at her with surprise. "Why?" "Because I need to be there when it happens. Because I need to see this through. Because," she said carefully, "I'm not tired anymore, and I'd rather learn what a queen does at midnight than lie here alone wondering." His eyes searched her face, looking for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. "Very well. But you'll stand quietly while I work. No distracting commentary about my handwriting or my treaty terms. I make no promises." That earned her a brief smile. "Come then." Chapter 4. The sleep. The palace after midnight felt different. Quieter. Colder. Like a beast holding its breath. Their footsteps echoed against stone as they descended the narrow stairs. Isabelle's pulse hammered in her ears. Every step brought them closer to the moment of truth. "He'll drink. He'll sleep. And I'll be there to make sure no one takes advantage." The war chamber doors loomed ahead. The same guard from before straightened when he saw them. "Your Majesty. My lady." "At ease," Vela said, pushing the door open without ceremony. "No interruptions, unless the palace is burning." "Yes, Your Majesty." They entered. Candles had burned even lower, wax pooling on brass holders. The maps seemed to loom larger in the dimness, their pins casting long shadows. There, on the table, the decanter, still half full of dark wine, now laced with sleeping draught. Isabelle's throat tightened. She moved to the side of the room, near the long couch against the wall, trying to appear casual, uninterested. Viola crossed to the table, immediately absorbed in the scattered documents. He lifted one, frowned at it, made a notation with his quill. Minutes passed. He worked with focused intensity, occasionally muttering under his breath about idiotic border clauses and lords who can't negotiate their way out of a grain sack. Isabelle watched his hand drift closer to the decanter. Pause. Move away. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. Finally. He reached for it with the absent-minded gesture of a man who'd poured himself wine 1,000 times. He filled his goblet without looking, eyes still scanning the parchment in his other hand. He lifted the cup to his lips. Time seemed to slow. She watched his throat work as he swallowed. Once. Twice. He drained half the goblet before setting it down with a soft clink. These border terms are abysmal, he muttered, still reading. Harren couldn't negotiate a fair price for horseshoes, let alone. He stopped, blinked. His hand went to his temple. That's odd. Isabelle's breath caught. What is? Nothing. Just He shook his head as if to clear it. I feel strange, heavy. She forced herself to stay still, to keep her voice neutral. Perhaps you should sit. I'm fine. I just need to. He reached for the document again, but his fingers fumbled. The parchment slipped from his grasp, drifting to the floor. He stared at it, like he couldn't understand how it had gotten there. Vylor. She stood, moving toward him. Sit down. What? His eyes found hers, confusion clouding them. Then slowly, understanding flickered. What did you do? Her chin lifted. What you wouldn't do for yourself. The draft. His voice roughened. You. The wine? Yes. For a moment she thought he'd call the guards, have her arrested, end this before it began. Instead, he laughed, a short, breathless sound. Bold to the last. His knees buckled. She lunged forward, catching him before he hit the floor. He was heavier than she'd expected, all muscle and dead weight. Together, they stumbled toward the couch. You drugged me, he said, words slurring slightly. You actually. Someone had to. She lowered him onto the cushions. You were going to kill yourself through sheer stubbornness. He tried to focus on her face, but his eyes kept sliding closed. If I die from this, you won't, it's just sleep. Real sleep? She began unfastening his cloak, removing the heavy chain at his throat, anything sharp or restrictive. Edrin measured it carefully. Edrin doesn't know. He fought to keep his eyes open, losing. Does he? No, I stole it. Another weak laugh. Treason. On your wedding night. How romantic. Shut up and sleep. His hand shot out with surprising speed, catching her wrist. Even drugged, his grip was iron. His eyes opened one last time, boring into hers with desperate intensity. Don't open the door, he slurred, no matter who comes, no matter what they say. Promise. I promise. They'll try. Council. Lord, someone will. His words dissolved into mumbles. Don't trust. I won't. Sleep, Vela. His eyes finally slid closed. His breathing deepened, chest rising and falling in heavy waves. The tension in his shoulders melted away. His hand loosened around her wrist, but didn't release it entirely. Fingers curled limply against her pulse point. She stood there for a long moment, watching him. Without the weight of consciousness, his face looked different, younger. The hard lines softened. The permanent furrow between his brows eased. He looked almost peaceful. Isabelle gently extracted her wrist and moved to the doors. She slid the heavy iron bolts home with solid thunks that echoed through the chamber. Alone. She was alone with a sleeping Alpha King. The full weight of what she'd done settled over her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. She'd drugged him, rendered him helpless. If anyone discovered this, if anyone tried the doors and found them barred, questions would be asked, suspicions raised, too late to turn back now. She returned to the couch, sank into the chair beside it, and prepared for a long night. For the first hour, he slept peacefully. His breathing remained deep and even, occasionally punctuated by a soft snore that made her bite back a smile. The king does snore. I was right. But as the second hour crept past, things changed. It started with a twitch, a faint tightening at the corners of his eyes. His breathing hitched, turned shallow, his hands curled into fists. "No," he mumbled. "No, wait." Isabelle leaned forward. "Vylor, you're dreaming." His head jerked on the cushion. A low sound escaped his throat, half growl, half groan. "Arion, Theris, too slow. I was too slow." His brothers, the ones who died in the ambush. "You're in your war chamber," she said firmly. "The doors are barred. You're safe." But he couldn't hear her. The draft held his body still, while nightmares ravaged his mind. "Should have been there." His voice cracked. "My fault. My fault. Knives under truce banners, blood in the grass. Should have." His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist with crushing force. Pain lanced up her arm, sharp and immediate. She gasped, but didn't pull away. "Vylor, listen to me." "Fail them?" Anguish roughened his words. "Failed everyone. Father trusted the draft, trusted sleep. They cut his throat while he dreamed. Can't let them." Understanding crashed over her. This was why he wouldn't take the sleeping draft. Not just because of nightmares, but because his father had been murdered in his sleep. Because vulnerability meant death in his world. And she'd forced it on him anyway. Guilt twisted in her chest. "You're not your father," she said, raising her voice. "And I'm not letting anyone near you. Feel this." She pressed their joined hands to her chest, above her racing heart. "This is real. This is now. You're not in that field. You're here. With me." His grip tightened further. Bones ground together in her wrist. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Isabelle." Her name on his sleeping tongue. Barely a whisper. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving." Slowly, so slowly, his breathing began to even out. The worst of the nightmare's grip loosened. His hand remained over her heart, heavy and warm, but the crushing pressure eased, his face smoothed, the anguish faded back into troubled sleep. She didn't move, couldn't move, with her wrist still caught in his grip. So she sat there, back aching, arm throbbing, keeping vigil over a king who trusted no one with his vulnerability, until she'd stolen the choice from him. Did I do the right thing? Or did I just prove him right? That sleep is when the knives come out? Hours crawled past. Once, boots thudded in the corridor outside, stopped at the door. The latch rattled. "Your Majesty?" A muffled voice. "Lord Harren, maybe." "Your Majesty, the Eastern courier needs your seal." Silence. Another rattle. "Strange." The door's barred from inside. "Should we force it?" A second voice, younger. "Force the king's war chamber. Are you mad?" "He's probably." A meaningful pause. "Occupied with his new queen. We'll get the seal in the morning." Footsteps retreated. Isabelle released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The night stretched on. Another candle guttered out. The moon tracked across the skylight overhead, throwing shifting shadows across the maps. Vala's nightmares came in waves, sometimes subsiding to restless twitching, sometimes crashing back, with names torn from his throat like prayers. Arion, Theris, Lisa, Edrin's father, a litany of the dead, and failed. Each time, she talked him down, reminded him where he was, pressed his hand to her heart until the anchor of her pulse pulled him back from whatever abyss he'd fallen into. By the time the eastern windows began to pale with dawn, her voice was hoarse, and her wrist had gone numb. But he'd slept, truly slept, more than he probably had in years. She watched the first grey fingers of light creep across the maps, turning inked borders to faint scars, and wondered what would happen when he woke. Would he thank her? Or would he make her wish she'd never touched that vial? Chapter 5. The Reckoning. Velo's hand twitched first, then his lashes fluttered. A low groan rumbled in his chest as he dragged himself up from depths he clearly didn't visit often. Isabelle held her breath. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, hazy with sleep. Then awareness snapped in. His gaze darted from ceiling to walls to the barred door, and finally down to where his hand still lay, over her heart, fingers tangled with hers. His entire body went rigid. Slowly, deliberately, he disentangled his hand and pushed himself upright. The motion was stiff, ungraceful. His limbs moved like they belonged to someone else. He swung his feet to the floor, elbows braced on his knees, head bowed. Hair fell forward, shadowing his face. Isabelle flexed her freed hand. Pain shot through her wrist. The bones felt bruised, maybe cracked. Red marks ringed her skin like a bracelet of finger-shaped brands. She hissed softly. He heard. His head snapped up, eyes locking on the bruises. Horror flickered across his features, raw and unmistakable. I did that. Not a question, an accusation against himself. You were dreaming. You didn't know. That's no excuse. His voice came out rough, scraped raw. It's the only one you have. They stared at each other in the washed-out light of almost morning. A king who'd just woken from his first real sleep in years, and the queen who'd forced it on him. How long? He asked finally. All night. She kept her voice steady despite her exhaustion. You drank not long after we arrived. Fought the sleep for maybe 5 minutes. Then it dragged you under. And then? You dreamed. Hard. She watched him carefully. You called for Arian and Theris. You cursed someone named Lisa. You begged Edrin's father not to leave the northern border undefended. You accused yourself of every death marked on those maps. His jaw clenched. What else? You told me not to open the door, made me promise. She paused. Lord Harren came, tried the latch, left when he found it barred. Viola's eyes widened fractionally. He'll have questions. Let him ask them. I'm your queen now. I don't answer to him. Something that might have been approval flickered in his gaze. You stayed. All night. I gave you my word. You could have left once I was unconscious. Could have opened the doors, let the council find me helpless. His voice dropped. Could have held a blade to my throat yourself. I could have, she agreed. I didn't. Why? The question hung between them, weighted with genuine confusion, as if he truly couldn't fathom why someone would guard him rather than exploit his weakness. Because, Isabelle said carefully, I didn't drug you to destroy you. I drugged you to save you. From what? Myself? From the consequences of your own pride. She leaned forward. You were going to collapse eventually, Vylor. In a council meeting, or on a battlefield, or in front of your enemies. Better it happen here, behind barred doors, with someone watching your back. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a rusty, disbelieving sound. You drugged me for my own good. Yes. On our wedding night. Seemed as appropriate a time as any. His laugh turned into something darker, edged with hysteria. I married a mad woman. The court will have a field day. The court, she said flatly, can hang. That startled him into silence. Then slowly his expression shifted, the anger and confusion giving way to something more complex, something that looked almost like wonder. You're not afraid, he said. I'm terrified, she corrected. But fear and courage aren't opposites. They're companions. He rose, slowly, rolling his shoulders. The stiffness melted with each movement, replaced by loose, wary energy she hadn't seen in him before. I haven't slept like that since before my brothers died, he said quietly. If Edrin hears about this, he'll never let me live it down. Will you tell him? I'll tell him I finally took his draft. Valo moved to the table, picking up the empty goblet. He studied the wine residue in the bottom. I won't mention the maid who tricked me into it. Her chest tightened. Why not? Because if I say your name in that context, Edrin will look at you as someone who saved my life. The court will look at you as someone who dared to take it. Either way, they'll see you as a lever to move me. He set the goblet down. You have enough weight on your shoulders already. She hadn't expected protection, especially not from him. So you'll lie. I'll protect what's mine, he corrected. You merely benefit. Is that what I am now? Yours? His eyes found hers across the table. You became mine the moment you slapped me. You just didn't know it yet. Heat crept up her neck. She ignored it. I'm still angry you humiliated me in that hall. Good. He circled the table, moving toward her with predatory grace. Anger means you care enough to feel something. I can work with that. He stopped in front of her, reached for her injured wrist with surprising gentleness, lifting it to examine the marks he'd left. I hurt you, he said, thumb brushing over the bruised skin. You were fighting demons I can't see. That doesn't make it acceptable. He raised her wrist to his lips and pressed a slow, deliberate kiss to the reddened skin. Fire shot up her arm. Every nerve came alive. What are you doing? Her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. Balancing scales, he murmured against her knuckles. You bruised me in public. I bruised you in private. We're even in some small way. Not even, she whispered. Not yet. His smile turned dangerous. Then we have time. He released her hand, stepped back. The loss of contact left her skin cold. When we step out of this room, he said, they'll search our faces for signs of what passed between us. Let them see what they expect. A king who's claimed his queen, a queen who survived her first night. And what actually happened. That, he said, remains between us, you, me, and whatever gods bother to watch kings in their cups. He moved to the door, slid the bolts back with steady scrapes of metal on metal. Dawnlight spilled in when he opened it. The palace was waking, servants' voices drifting on the air, the clatter of dishes, the tramp of guards changing shifts. Vilo glanced back at her. Walk beside me, not behind. I want them to see you as my equal, not my possession. Why? Because, he said, you drugged an Alpha King and lived to tell the tale. That deserves respect, even if I'm the only one who knows it. She crossed the threshold to join him. As they stepped into the corridor together, a king who'd finally slept, and the queen who'd forced it, palace servants stopped mid-stride to stare. A guard's mouth fell open. A maid dropped her tray with a clatter that echoed down the hall. They stared at Viola's rumpled clothes, his bare head, crown still abandoned somewhere. At Isabelle's silk gown creased from a night spent in a chair, her hair falling from its careful braids. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She'd survived her first night as queen. And more than that, she'd proven something neither of them had expected, that power could be taken and given back. That vulnerability didn't have to mean destruction. That trust, once earned, was more dangerous than any blade. As they walked through the waking palace, Isabelle caught glimpses of reactions. Lord Harren's startled face quickly smoothed to neutrality. Tessian's narrow-eyed assessment. A cluster of maids whispering behind their hands. They climbed the stairs toward the royal apartments. At the landing, Viola paused. "You'll have your own chambers now," he said, "connected to mine by a door that locks from your side." She blinked. "You're giving me a locked door?" "I'm giving you a choice," he corrected. "Whether to open it or keep it barred. That's more than most queens get." "Why?" His eyes held hers. "Because you didn't open the war chamber doors last night. Because you kept your word even when I was helpless." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "And because I'm beginning to suspect that the most dangerous thing I could do is make you feel caged." "You're right," she said. "It is." He smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes. "Then I'll be careful." A door opened down the hall. Lady Mellon emerged, took one look at them, and her eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Your Majesty, my lady, you're awake early." "We never slept," Baylor said smoothly. "Too much to discuss. Treaties, border disputes, the price of grain in the southern provinces." Mellon's expression suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "Of course, Your Majesty." "See that my queen is settled in her chambers," he continued. "She'll need fresh clothes, breakfast, and whatever else she requires. And Marlon?" "Yes, Your Majesty?" "Anyone who disturbs her rest today will answer to me personally." Mellon's eyes widened fractionally. "Understood." Viola turned to Isabelle. "Sleep. Real sleep in a proper bed. I'll handle the council." "You just woke from a drugged sleep. You should rest too." "I've had more rest in the last 6 hours than I've had in months." His hand found hers briefly, squeezed. "Thanks to you." He released her and strode off down the corridor, already calling for his attendants to bring him fresh clothes and strong tea. Mellon watched him go, then turned to Isabelle with open curiosity. What exactly happened in that war chamber? "He worked on treaties," Isabelle said blandly. "I watched. All night. All night. With the doors barred. He values his privacy." Mellon's lips twitched. "I see." She gestured down a different corridor. "This way, my lady. Your chambers await." As Isabelle followed, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Her legs felt like water, her wrist throbbed, and her eyes burned from a night without sleep. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Something unexpected. Pride. She'd drugged a king, guarded him through his nightmares, and emerged with his respect rather than his wrath. Not a bad start for a maid turned queen. The story of what would happen next, whether this uneasy alliance would become something more, or whether it would fracture under the weight of court politics and old wounds, remained unwritten. But for the first time since that slap echoed through the throne hall, Isabelle felt like she might survive long enough to see it unfold. Epilogue. 1 month later. The war chamber had become Isabelle's second home. She sat at the great table, maps spread before her, marking grain shipments and trade routes with the same careful precision she'd once used to scrub floors. Varlo stood at her shoulder, occasionally reaching past her to correct a notation or add a comment in his sharp, efficient script. "You've made an error," he said, tapping the map. "That route floods in spring. Move the shipment north." She made the change without argument. He'd been right about these things enough times that she'd learned to trust his judgment. "There," she said. "Better? Better?" He straightened, one hand coming to rest on her shoulder. The touch was casual, familiar, the kind of unconscious contact that had developed over weeks of working side by side. They'd fallen into a rhythm, the two of them, days spent managing the kingdom's endless needs, evenings spent in the ancestral chamber, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence. Nights when she'd hear his nightmares through the connecting door and slip into his chambers to wake him gently, reminding him where he was. He slept better now. Not perfectly. The nightmares still came, but better. And she'd learned that being queen meant more than wearing silk and attending ceremonies. It meant making impossible decisions about who received aid and who went without. It meant learning to read maps and trade agreements and the subtle shifts in court politics. It meant standing beside a man who was slowly learning he didn't have to stand alone. A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Varlo called. Edren shuffled in, physician's satchel in hand, silver hair catching the lamplight. His eyes landed on Isabelle, and he smiled. A warm, genuine expression that still surprised her. "Your Majesty." "My lady," he bowed. "I've brought your tonic, Majesty, though I notice you've been sleeping better lately." Vilo's hand tightened fractionally on Isabelle's shoulder. "I've been managing." "Indeed." Edren's eyes twinkled, with something that looked suspiciously like knowledge. "Almost as if someone finally convinced you to take proper rest." "The kingdom has been less demanding," Valo said smoothly. How fortunate." Edren set a small bottle on the table. "Still, keep this on hand, for difficult nights." After he left, Isabelle turned in her chair to look up at Valo. "He knows. Edren knows everything. It's his most annoying quality." "Will he say anything?" "To whom?" "The man guards secrets better than I guard borders." Valo's hand slid from her shoulder to cup her face. "And even if he did, what would he say? That my queen cares enough about my well-being to drug me? They'd call you ruthless and clever. Two qualities every queen should possess." She leaned into his touch. "I'm still sorry I didn't ask first." "I'm not." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You did what I couldn't do myself. That takes a different kind of courage than striking me ever did." "Speaking of which," she gestured to his unmarked cheek. "The bruise faded weeks ago. The court has probably forgotten I ever slapped you." "I haven't." His eyes glinted. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that slap." "Because it brought you a queen?" "Because it brought me you." Before she could respond, he bent and kissed her, slow and thorough, tasting of wine and something sweeter. The runes in the ancestral chamber might have judged their bond, but this was their choice, made and remade every day. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing harder. "You never did tell me," Isabelle said, "whether you forgave me. For the drugging." Valo smiled against her mouth. "I'm still deciding." "How long will that take?" "Perhaps a lifetime." His hand found hers, fingers threading together. You may have to spend years convincing me. I suppose I can live with that. Good, he murmured, because I'm not letting you go. Outside the war chamber, the palace continued its endless rhythm, servants working, nobles scheming, the kingdom turning on its axis. But inside this room, a king and his queen were building something new. Something that had started with a slap and a sleeping draft. Something that might, eventually, look like love. The end. So here's the question. What would you have done? Would you have struck the king, knowing it might cost your life? Would you have drugged him for his own good, or let him collapse under his own pride? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden romance and a queen who refused to bow, hit subscribe. Like if you're rooting for queens who stand up for themselves. Share if you know someone who needs to hear this story. Remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell a king the truth. But sometimes it's the only thing worth doing. Stay bold. Stay brave. Never underestimate the power of someone with nothing left to lose. See you in the next story.